Welcome to First Responder Friday. My name is Conrad Weaver. I am so glad you have joined us on this Friday. Whether you are watching live, if you're watching live, obviously you're on Facebook or Twitter or on YouTube. And if you could just let us know in the comments where you're from, maybe if you're a part of a first responder agency, let us know what type of agency you work for. That'd be awesome to let us kind of give us a little insight as to who's watching. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, you obviously can't see us, but I'd encourage you to also join us on the live shows every Friday right here on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. And so I'm so glad that you have decided to stop by and check out what we're doing. If you want more information about our movie that we're producing, go to ptsd911movie.com. You can learn everything you need to know about our film and learn about what we are doing. Well, first of all, I am not a first responder, but I'm a friend of first responders, and I bring first responder leaders from around the country here to this show each week to talk about the issues that are facing our first responder community. And today, we have a very special guest. Patrick Welsh is an author, a speaker, a trainer, and an expert witness. He has a distinguished career, a 26-year career with the Dayton, Ohio Police Department, and he rose through the ranks from a patrol officer to sergeant to lieutenant, through the narcotics and central investigations as a commander, and finished his career as a major of the West Patrol operations. And today he lives in Colorado, and I'm so jealous that Pat lives in Colorado because I love it out there. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Conrad. Glad to be here.
So what made you decide to move to Colorado from Ohio?
No, well, for starters, there's no humidity out here to speak of. And blue skies 300 days a year instead of gray skies like in the Midwest. And as always, family. We have a daughter and son-in-law and a granddaughter that live up in the mountains who came out here before we did. And then another daughter and son-in-law, they followed us here. So we're not native Coloradans, but we're very well entrenched. Been here 8 years now.
I lived out there for a couple of years and just really fell in love with it and would love to go back at some point. But right now I'm in Maryland, so we'll deal with that at a later time. So tell me what got you involved in law enforcement. You have kind of a different path into law enforcement.
Yeah, very different path. For people watching and listening, I was actually an assistant district attorney who became a cop. And so I had prosecuted everything from jaywalking to murder and did that for 4 years. And one day my wife's like, "You really don't seem to be very happy. What's going on?" And I said, "I don't like practicing law, and I don't like." And she goes, "What do you want to do?" I said, "What I've wanted to do since I was 10 years old is I want to be a police officer." So we'd been married 6 years, had 2 children by that point, or no, 3. And she said, "Well, then go do it." So I took the test and worked my way up through the ranks and had a 26-year career.
That was a big change from a legal office on the prosecuting side or on the that side to being on the streets. What was the biggest surprise for you?
The biggest surprise would probably first of all, I ended up on midnights. I spent half my career as a patrolman, as a sergeant, and even as a watch commander, 13 years on midnights. So that was probably the biggest surprise, was seeing life after midnight in a major urban environment. And it is a completely different world than the 9-to-5 life. So that was an eye-opener.
It's kind of like, my wife's been in education for, almost 25, 30 years. And during the COVID time, sometimes we'd be out, in town, and she's like, people are actually like out doing stuff during the day, because she's always in the classroom or in the school, and doesn't realize that life goes on outside of this. So I'm sure it's the same way with, in law enforcement, stuff happens at night, right?
Yeah. Well, when I had enough seniority at one point, I was working 8 at night to 6 in the morning as a sergeant. and I had enough seniority to go to days and work 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. I lasted 3 weeks of doing that, and I asked the sergeant on midnights who had no seniority. I said, "Will you trade with me so I can go back to nights, because I just could not take the daytime, the traffic, and just it was terrible. 3 weeks into it, I told my wife, I said, I'm going back to midnights."
So in your time, your 26 years in law enforcement, what did you learn about leadership?
Well, I learned what bad leadership was rather quickly. Over 26 years, and this isn't terribly unique, the life expectancy of a police chief in law enforcement with an agency is about 3 to 5 years. So we had chiefs that only were there 18 months to 2 years.
And is that because
altogether,
they're oftentimes in cities, they're being put in by new mayors or new administrations in the city? Is that why there's a turnover there?
There's so many different reasons. And altogether, between chiefs and acting chiefs, I went through eight chiefs or acting chiefs in 26 years. So one of the things I learned about leadership, a big thing is succession planning and continuity, because every time a new chief came in, then they would bring people in from the outside. They didn't know anybody from the, within the ranks, and trying to develop the connectivity and relationship building, because we were a collective bargaining state. So there was just a whole lot of things. And I guess probably the number one, and I actually laminated this and put it on my door, is I found my foundation, my motto, if you will, is are you doing the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons? And that kind of became my guidepost, so that when I was a sergeant, as I was coming up through the ranks, and somebody that was working, that I had a position of influence because of having bars, stars, stripes, I learned from a leadership perspective, I can't do your job for you. So if I was a sergeant and you were a field training officer, and you came to me and go, "Hey, boss, I'm having trouble with my rookie," they want me to give them the answers. And I learned the leadership way of doing that is to actually challenge them. Well, what do you think is the right thing to do? What's the right way to do it? When's the right time to do it? And why are you doing it? What are the reasons? Because you can do the right thing at the wrong time and it's going to blow up in your face. Or you can do the right thing, but you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and the message delivered isn't the message received, because you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and you're doing it. So that's probably and I'm in my 60s, the best thing I ever learned about leadership over the last 60 years, or 40 plus years of my adult life, are to ask those 4 questions.
So was your experience in law enforcement and seeing how leadership works kind of a motivation for you to really hone that skill in you, and the training then, which is what you do today?
Definitely for the training I do today, because I had seen some of the worst in leadership, and I was on the receiving end of some very toxic treatment by people in positions of authority, and I know what that feels like, and I know what it does to you physically, emotionally, what it does to your family, and so that's why I became a student. But it's not just a student of leadership from, and we talk offline. I went through John Maxwell's certification program, and I've taken some other stuff. But I'm a huge student of Sun Tzu and the Art of War because of the principles that coincide with those four questions that I ask. Sun Tzu called it different things: the way, the weather. He had different terms for it, but he was talking about the same principles. And I have found, like, when I taught a bunch of security forces personnel at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and I was there for a week, and I think it was somewhere in the vicinity of 400 cops over a period of those 5 days. So a whole flight, 80 people at a time, 5 days. And the best evaluation I got, and I was there to teach them about leadership. The best evaluation I got said this: "You've given me the tools to help save my marriage." So the principles of leadership are applicable not just in the police department or not in your Fortune 500 company, but in your family. Those same principles are what creates success in your family.
That's really important, because I think, all of us have leadership responsibilities in one way or another, whether it's in our family, whether it's on our job, whether it's in our church or our local community. We all have those opportunities, and if we screw up on any of those, it's going to mess up the relationships that we have. And I think if we learn those leadership principles, like you said, I think it applies to everything, right?
Well, it does. And John Maxwell, there's a gazillion definitions of leadership out there. Or if you ask people, how do you define leadership? They will start giving you, lead from the front, and they give you examples of a style of leadership, but they don't know what is leadership. And I think Maxwell said it most succinctly: leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So if you are a person of influence in somebody else's life, in their eyes, you're a leader. And so you have to build on that. And then there's other aspects to leadership. And you and I were talking about it, before we started the show, but my tagline, if you want to call it that, is you have to have a warrior, servant, leader mindset. It's three parts of one person, and you have to have those mindsets at home, in your neighborhood, at work, in your faith life, and all that. You can't separate it. They're intertwined like this, and it's not just about leadership. That's one part, and probably not a first responder, but in my lifetime, the person that I would say defined the best the warrior, servant, leader mindset is now Saint Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa. If you read and study her, you can see the different applications of that mindset, and was the most humble person in the world,
right.
I think.
Right. So in some of your documentation, I found that you say you help law enforcement professionals protect with courage, serve with humility, and lead with compassion. So why is that important in law enforcement?
Well, cops are really, really good about protect and serve. That kind of at least the jargon, and they put it on their cruisers and all that kind of stuff. And when I say you have to have a warrior mindset, a lot of people don't understand. They think that's in fact, a lot of places, or politicians and whatnot, are saying, you need to lose the warrior mindset. No, you don't, if you understand what it means to be a warrior. And when I say, the protect part is, here's what a warrior is. It's this simple. You stand up, show up, and defend what you believe. That's what a warrior does. Stand up, show up, and defend what you believe. It can be your family, it can be your faith, it can be your values, it can be your community. So when you're putting on the uniform, you are standing up, showing up, and defending the least, the last, the lost, the victims that you come across, and you're defending the rule of law, all of those things. But you have to do it in a way is you're not punching people in the mouth, kind of. You can't be arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
You can't bulldog. There's a time that you have to have that command presence in a situation. But at the same time, you have to defend what your core values are and what the values of your department and your city, or whoever is signing your paycheck. What's the mission and vision statements of your agency? If you don't know them, you can't defend them. And so that's part of having that protect mindset, that warrior mindset, is you have to know what you're defending and what you're protecting. And then you have to, a servant is putting the wants and needs of others before yourself. Just ask any parent. You get that one down pretty quick when the baby's crying. But and we do it with our kids, as we raise them. We put their wants and needs ahead of our own. And for police officers, that serve part of protect and serve is they have to have that humility that, and I would tell this to officers that work for me, that when I was a downtown commander, you see somebody drinking out of a paper bag, that's no big deal to you. But it is a big deal to my mom when she's downtown shopping. And so you have to serve with humility and get rid of that ego, or get rid of that mindset of you're going to do it to you. I have a badge, I'm the police and you're not, kind of deal. And that's one of the biggest problems cops have, is we are so used to giving orders that we forget how to connect and communicate with people. We start giving our spouses orders, we start giving our kids orders, and we can't shut off. And we want compliance. And if you don't comply, there's consequences. And when we get that kind of mindset going, that's how we lose the humility. That we're no longer serving people, we're bossing people around. And that's not our job. And then the leadership part of it then is, you never know. Let me tell you a real quick story that kind of emphasizes all this. So I was a patrolman working midnights, and it was about 2:00 in the morning. I get sent on a call of a return missing juvenile, a 12-year-old boy had come home. He didn't come home from school. Parents reported him missing. 2:00 that night, he comes back home. So it's in a very, very violent neighborhood, all African-American neighborhood. And I get the call to go take the paperwork on this. So it's like, hey, the bars are getting ready to close, and all the stuff, the fun stuff is going to start happening. And I'm taking a report on a return missing. So I get there, and I was shocked how well kept the yard was. I mean, the rest of the neighborhood looked like third world. So I, knock on the door, and both mom and dad answered the door. And this is typically a neighborhood that was all single parent households. So they invite me in. The house is impeccable. Another kind of unusual. And they explained to me that they both have jobs. They send their son to private school, so he's not in the public school. So they're sacrificing finances, but he's running with the wrong crowd. And now he pulled this stunt of not coming home after school, and they just don't know what to do. And I said, well, he is home. Yes. Is he okay? Yes. Because I need that for my report. And that's all I had to do is confirm that. And then mom goes, will you talk to him? because we don't know what else to do. And I said, absolutely. Now, putting the wants and needs of other, I wanted to go out and do police work, you know? So they call the young man in, 12 years old. And I told him, I said, let me talk to him, just me. And I don't want you guys there. Just let me talk to him. They go, fine. So he sat down, never made eye contact with me, never said a word. And I wasn't with him 10 minutes. But I didn't talk to him like a cop. I talked to him like a parent. And I'm sure I didn't say anything that his parents hadn't already said to him. And then I left. 18 years later, I'm standing in line at a Kroger's off duty, minding my own business, girls ringing up my purchases. There's a little old lady in line behind me, and then some people behind her. And there's this guy, he's about 6'2", black male, goes, hey, Welsh, is that you? And I kind of did a little look, because normally people don't call you by your last name.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't recognize him. And I said, yes, it is. May I ask who you are? And he goes, you probably don't remember me. I said, no, sir, I don't. He goes, when I was 12 years old, you came to my house because I had run away from home. I just want to tell you, I graduated college, I'm married, I have 2 children, and thank you. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about the protecting and serving and leading mindset, you have no idea how you're going to impact somebody's life by what you say, how you say it, what you do or don't do, and how you treat people. And that is, we lose that in law enforcement for a lot of reasons. They're excuses, but they're reasons. And that's why I train the way I do and why I do it, is to change that culture in law enforcement, which will also impact the culture of your community.
Do you think that's maybe the underlying, maybe one of the underlying things that's happening today in what we're seeing on the news, that that law enforcement has lost some of that really caring and compassion and serving with humility ideals?
That's part of it. There's more to it than that.
Sure.
When you get into law enforcement, 99% of everybody that wants to be a cop, in an interview, the oral interview process, you'll be asked, why do you want to be a police officer? And 99% of us all say the same thing. We want to get back to the community or some form. We want to help. And there's an idealism of being a police officer is altruistic. It's something greater than yourself. And that's what drives you to want to go into law enforcement, 99% of us. And then you go through the academy, it's very rigid, it's very structured, and you're learning all the laws. And then you come out, and in your first 1 to 3 years, you're working on finding your niche. What do you really like? What are you competent? Some guys and gals, they love traffic. Me, it was all about, guns and drugs and the violence, because of where I was, the districts I worked in. And slowly we start developing an us versus them attitude. And an attitude is defined as a settled way of thinking. And by years 5 and 7, we don't even have any friends anymore that aren't cops. We surround ourselves, we only associate with other cops. And I mean, literally, our street was only 2 blocks long. Our one block had 11 houses. 7 of us were cops. And so we start circling the wagons, and then there's all these influences, be it the media, be it civic leaders, whatever, is suddenly we're no longer the good guys. We're always being talked about or treated as the bad guys. Well, that starts influencing
Hmm.
your mindset, and you do lose. I don't want to say you lose touch with the humanity of
Hmm.
policing, and that you're no longer touched by. I mean, most cops. I've been on hundreds of homicides, um, and unless it was an infant or a small child, it's you just shut it out, and um, you don't let it get to you. But then you start shutting out your family. You know, divorces start picking up year 7, 8, 9. The alcohol use or abuse and other issues, anger management, all these things start building up because we don't feel we have an outlet to share that. And you're not going to share it with any other cops because then you're going to be like, oh, you know, you really probably ought to find another job kind of deal. It's
Hmm.
suck it up, buttercup kind of
Hmm.
mentality. So all those influences go into taking away that humanness, that humility, that servant mindset, unless you try intentionally uh, address it and deal with it.
Hmm. How much of these kind of issues that and kind of those cycles that you described, how much of that is just as a result of just normal police work, or how much of it is influenced or as is a result of poor leadership?
It it's a combination of both, and it's not just unique to law enforcement. You see it in marriages. Um, when reality collides with what your idealism was, what you thought marriage was going to be, what you thought policing was going to be, or you get your degree in engineering, or you go to law school, and then you come out and you go, well, this isn't what I expected. Uh, and that's when you get it's called disillusionment. You start getting disillusioned about the choices that you've made. So part of it is internal.
Hmm.
The other part of it is external, the leadership standpoint, because if you're working in a leadership, a command structure that has the mentality of just do your job and don't cause me any problems, that's their leadership style. Um, then it shuts you down from being able to get the help that you need when you're struggling. And there isn't a cop around that hasn't struggled with all these issues. It's just how you have handled them. And so the the PTSD, the anger management, the you get the complaints, that the officer's rude, the excessive use of force. All those are behaviors that are giving you a clue that their attitude is out of whack with the mission and vision of the agency. And there are some people that in law enforcement absolutely have no business being in law enforcement for a number of reasons. But if you have leadership that doesn't step up and deal with it, then it only escalates and gets worse.
Hmm.
And then you could have a leader that I call it the favorite son leader. That if they have favorites and you're not one of them, then that impacts
Hmm.
your mindset at work.
Hmm.
And then how people say don't bring work home and don't bring home to work. That's not physically possible.
Hmm.
You can't do that. If you can, then you need professional psychological help because you got a split person. It is impossible not to have your home life affect work life and vice versa. So you have to learn how to deal with it,
Hmm.
and you have to have outlets and a strategy,
Hmm.
and mentors and coaches that you can rely on. And there's going to be people that rely on you
Hmm.
to help them. And you
We
can't
talked a
turn.
little. We talked a little bit earlier about what you saw in leadership that was negative in your 26 years in law enforcement. What did you see that really was positive and that really moved you in the right direction?
Probably, and he's still chief there now, Rick Beal, probably one of the best leadership, and he's been there 12 years now. He's long outlived the life expectancy. And one of the best things he taught me from a leadership standpoint was to have a collaboration outlook, that you can't have all the answers, nor do we expect you to have all the answers and solutions, and that you have to collaborate and delegate and participate with not just people in the department, but within the community. And he put me in charge of it's called the Community Initiative to Reduce Gun Violence in Dayton. Gangs were literally killing us. 48% of all our homicides were gang related. And he sent me to training with a guy named Dr. David Kennedy. And that's where I learned this whole collaboration, and some people call it thinking outside the box. I hate that saying. But the truth was, the police department was about that much responsible for impacting the violent crime in Dayton, that it wasn't a police problem. We were responding to a community problem, but we were not involving the community in the solutions. We were not involving the court system. We were not involving social services. And once we put that all together, we ended up in 2 years, we reduced gang-related murders by 64%. Wow. And we kept it down. And then I retired a couple of years later. But that was the best leadership tool that I ever learned from somebody, firsthand, was have that collaboration mindset, because everybody has to be on the same message. And it was incredible. I mean, 64% we reduced.
That's huge.
And it was incredible. And then the juvenile court judges said, hey, we want to bring this into the juvenile court system. So I called Dr. Kennedy, and he goes, you can't do it. I said, well, why not? He goes, because you don't have the same stick, if you will, the carrot and the stick kind of philosophy with juveniles. I said, okay, thanks. So I went back to the chief. I said, Chief, Dr. Kennedy says it won't work. And he goes, you don't work for Dr. Kennedy. You work for me. He goes, make it work. So we sat down and we retooled what we were doing in the adult gang environment, retooled it with the message and with the judges and with the community support and social services, all that. And in a period of 2 years, 120 juveniles had to go through this process. 80% of them had no recidivism. They didn't even skip school. And so that's where I learned that all these things that are going on now, the defunding the police mantra, and all this reaction to perceptions, is none of the solutions are going to work if you don't have everybody at the table together and participating in the solution. And that's the only way it's going to work. Otherwise, these places that they're defunding, they're taking away qualified immunity, all these punitive measures are only going to make the situation worse. I told you Sun Tzu. You know what Sun Tzu says about this very issue? Just hundreds of years ago, Sun Tzu said this: your chances of success at bringing about change are greater if it's internalized, not enforced by outside imposition of rules and regulations. And so what we're facing right now is this outside imposition of rules and regulations to change perceived behavior by law enforcement. It's not going to work because it's not being internalized. If you internalize that you're being punished, here's what you're going to do. And not just at law enforcement. in any career path, if you feel you're being unjustly, punitively treated because of somebody else's misconduct, here's what you do. You retire on duty. You will now do the least amount of work to stay out of trouble, so the boss will leave me alone. Mm-hmm. And you will, every cop can tell you the exact day and time they can retire. They know exactly the day and time that they can retire. And so however much time they have left with these punitive approaches, not collaboration, not involving, not having police officers of all ranks get to participate in the strategy and the planning and the management of change, they're going to retire on duty. And on that day, at that time, they're going to walk in and they're going to, we called it the KMA letter, kiss my, you know what, I'm out of here. And that is no way to spend the rest of your career working. And it's also no way to provide the best protection and service and leadership that the community so desperately needs.
Mm-hmm. To looking at all these things, what is really, in your opinion, missing in law enforcement leadership today?
Believe it or not, law enforcement leadership doesn't really care. And let me explain what I mean by caring. But they don't care, particularly at that senior executive level in major departments, is they can just go somewhere else. They know their life expectancy is 3 to 5 years, or they took this job as a stepping stone to go to a bigger, better, greener pastures. And so when I say care, this is what it means for me when I use the word care. You are willing to commit all resources and energy, CARE, commit all resources and energy. And I don't think in many, many, many departments, there is that attitude of being willing to commit all resources and energy to solve the problems being faced internally or externally. Smaller departments have a little bit more of an advantage than we were. You know, Dayton was at one time 520-man department. You get into the thousands, and you get that disconnect, and it becomes you're not a leader anymore. You're just a boss, and you're trying to just keep the lid on things until you can either retire or find something better. And
why do you think that lack of caring, as you described it, is a factor? Excuse me, is a fact of leadership in law enforcement? Why is that?
Part of it is the nature of the beast and the politics of policing. That, yeah, you're the chief of police or you're the assistant chief of police, but in reality, you're not the policy maker. And so it's almost the damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of chair you're sitting in. And you get caught up in managing people instead of leading people. And I don't know if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's kind of like sports. If the team really sucks, they fire the coach. They don't fire the players. Well, in reality, it's the execution of the policy, you know, or the plays, if it's in sports or in law enforcement. It's the poor execution of the mission and vision and the behaviors and the policy that the community expects or that the elected officials expect. And so what do? They fire the chief. And they try to go, well, we'll just bring in a better coach. The team will be better. Well, no, that's not how it works. And so what you have within the rank and file is they mimic what they see. And what they see is if you screw up, you're going to get fired. And so they'll quit doing anything that might be perceived as a screw up. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing that now, you know, on the use of force. A lot, you know, we got to take away tasers. We have all these things. We're going, well, why? Because now you're just going to force that officer to either go hands on and get hurt or turn a blind eye. And one of my favorite, I don't know who this belongs to, but one of my favorite quotes is, if you turn a blind eye to something, eventually you're going to be blind in both eyes. And so I think from a leadership standpoint is that's what we see in policing, is turning a blind eye to things that are internal that we should be dealing. We should have early warning systems for problematic officers, but not so that we can go gotcha and punish you, but because we care about you. You know, that you're part of the family, if you will. We have invested a lot of time, a lot of money. You have a lot of knowledge. You have a lot of experience, but you're having a bad time for whatever reasons it is. And we just turn a blind eye to it. Or let's transfer them to a position where, say they have uses of forces that are questionable. Okay, well, let's take them off the street and let's make them a detective, or let's put them in the property room. You haven't solved the problem. And their behavior is a reflection of something that's going on up here. And if you really care about your people, then you'll commit all resources and energy to help them. And maybe the help they need is, you really shouldn't be in law enforcement anymore, because you could have some significant emotional, physical, psychological issues that, and it actually happened. And I'm not going to say any names, but there was an officer that I had to relieve of duty. He got specs and charges, and it turned out he had a serious alcohol problem, and he got fired. A year later, he stopped by the office, came in, and he goes, "Hey, I was a lieutenant, or no, I was a lieutenant at that time." He came into my office and he said, "Lieutenant, I just want to tell you, getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me." And it was unfortunate that it took getting fired, but no, you know, there were cops that worked with him that knew the issues that he was having, and they didn't say anything. And so that culture, I think you and I talked, I said, and when we start talking about culture, remind me to define what I mean by culture. And here's what culture means: the expected and accepted way of thinking, talking, and acting within a group. That's the culture. What is expected and accepted. Growing up as a kid, 50s and 60s, children are to be seen, not heard. That was the culture. That was what was expected and accepted at family gatherings. Or if you went out to dinner, you know, whatever. You to be seen, not heard. So if you want to change the culture of an organization, what you have to do is change what is expected and accepted. And it's not just in law. This is part of the other problem with police community relationship, is everybody, the chant is change, the police need to change their culture. That's true to an extent, but the community needs to change its culture as well. What is expected and accepted way of thinking, talking, and acting. I was on a homicide. There were 200 eyewitnesses, 200. They all stayed. Nobody left. It was a biker bar. 200 people saw what happened. It is still a cold case to this day.
Wow.
Not one person told us the truth or told us anything. And that's the culture. Don't be a snitch. Don't talk to the police. Lie to the police. And then you get mad at the police when they don't solve a crime, or you get mad at the police when crime goes up. And it's like, well, it's going up because we're not getting cooperation from people that know what happened, so we can catch the guy that's doing all this stuff. So that culture, and I think that's part of the thing that police leadership fails to do, is develop those relationships and the connection with the community so that we can actually, frankly, talk with community leaders and go, hey, yeah, we have this crime problem in this particular neighborhood. We need help from you to get the community to cooperate with us. And so it's just kind of this catch-22. It's not all the police's fault, and it's not all the community's fault, but nobody is going, we need to sit down and hash this out.
Mm-hmm. How can someone who's a rank and file, patrol officer, they're low on the totem pole, how can they lead up if they see where leadership needs to get to the place where they care, that care as you describe it? What can they do to kind of raise the bar to help their leaders get to where they need to be?
Have the guts to talk to the chief secretary and go, can I get on his calendar and have lunch with him, or just come into the office and share that mindset that you have of leading from the bottom up, leading by example, and tell your chief what your mission and vision is for your career. I said earlier, one of the things that we lack in law enforcement is succession planning, and raising up future positional leaders. In the NFL at one time, there were of all the head coaches in the NFL, all of them came up under the leadership of one of three other head coaches. There was 39 head coaches that came up under one of three guys.
Wow.
And this is why they came up under those three head coaches, because those head coaches, it wasn't about just winning. Nobody under Vince Lombardi ever became a head coach in their own right, but he was considered a great coach because he won a lot of games. Mm-hmm. These three head coaches, part of their mission and vision was to raise up future head coaches, not just winning teams. Lombardi said winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. These three coaches, it wasn't the only thing. And I think in law enforcement, chiefs and deputy chiefs and senior ranking folks don't know what the vision is in their own ranks. So they're not mentoring and coaching up people. It's like you take a test and you score number one, or however they select. It's all about performance, written tests and interviews, and that's who gets picked. And they may be great at taking tests and really suck at leading people. So you need to be developing the skills of the people you have so they can promote up or be that informal leader on their squad or in their unit. Mm-hmm. And we don't have those discussions.
What should we as citizens do instead of, chanting defund the police and all the crazy stuff that's going on? What can we do? What should we be doing to help our law enforcement get to the right spot?
And you're asking the wrong guy, because it's the right question. You have to ask it of the right person. Mm-hmm. And so citizens, and you don't have to be the CEO of some company. You can be mom and pop. Ask that question of your police chief. Ask that question of your mayor or your city manager. What can we do to help the police department be more successful at doing their mission and vision? And don't say at doing their job. Because cops Um, that if you give an attaboy to a police officer, give him the Medal of Valor, or just a compliment, call him a hero, and then the officer so-and-so rushed into a burning house and did X, Y, or Z, and then they go to interview the officer, he will tell you, I was just doing my job. No, you weren't. This isn't your job. A job is just where you get a paycheck. This is your passion. That you came into this career path and profession for very, very altruistic reasons. It's not a job to you. And I can prove it to you, and I do it with cops. When you ask a cop, if you could no longer be a police officer, what would you do? And if their response is, I don't know, you have a problem. You have an officer who defines himself by what he's doing. And that tells me if he goes, I don't know, that means he's not thinking about life after retirement. He's not thinking about healthy lifestyle things now so that he can enjoy life after retirement. He's not thinking about how he can relieve stress. He's only thinking about doing more as a police officer. When they start signing up for excessive overtime, they're missing their kids' t-ball games because they're working overtime, and those are signals to you that they're getting consumed by their job. And I guarantee you, they're going to spiral down. It's going to happen. They can't sustain that kind of stress in their life, and they're going to start spiraling downward. And that's part of the leadership the community can do, is what can we do to help your officers be better and not just being law enforcers. One of the best programs we had at the Dayton Police Department is we had the Police Athletic League. And so we were able to get officers to coach, basketball teams or judo teams, or we had inline hockey, and we had some officers that would take at-risk kids over to the University of Dayton once a week and have freshman college students tutor these kids in particular, different subjects, help them do their homework. So we got officers doing things that had absolutely nothing to do with enforcing the law, but it was building community relations. And so if you don't have a PAL program, or it doesn't have to be PAL, but if there isn't a program within your community involving the police in something that has absolutely nothing to do with being a cop, then start something. And that's something the community can take charge of, not the city, not the police department, but the community can be the leaders in engaging law enforcement in non-law enforcement ways. And that's how you build relationships, and that's how you build connections, so that when there may be a critical incident that happens, the gut reaction of the community isn't to be accusatory, but it's to be, well, I know these officers, something doesn't sound right. Let's wait for all the facts. Let's wait for the investigation. And it's all about, there is no destination. You never reach the finish line in this. It's like marriage, that it's constantly evolving and growing, and there's always going to be unexpected things happen. There's going to be conflicts, but if you have developed the relationship, the communication, and the skills and the tools to get through adversity in your married life, well, you can do the same thing in your work life. And we've been married 40 years, and we've had a boatload of adversity. Our youngest son died serving overseas in the military. But because we have built the foundation, and for us, it's our faith. That's what got us through that. Well, the same principles apply in the workforce and specifically in law enforcement or in the fire department. They're not immune to adversity and a lot of issues. And the PTSD, I mean, cops and firefighters see repeatedly things that no human being should ever have to witness in the first place. Mm-hmm. And not only do they see it, they are expected to deal with it non-emotionally. They are expected to solve the problem, whatever that is. They have to go in and testify and repeat what they've seen and heard. And then they're expected to keep that bottled up. Don't share that with your family. Don't scare your kids. Don't tell your wife about, or your husband about your day, because your day was nothing but, death and destruction and the worst. We see the worst in humanity, and you do that for 25 years. It's going to warp you if you don't intentionally find ways to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And going back to community relations, what you were talking about there, we had a situation in South Central Pennsylvania recently, soon after the George Floyd incident came to light, where a group of African American pastors got together with a group of police officers and chiefs and other deputies from the area for a conversation, and something beautiful came out of that. And now they're meeting on a regular basis just to talk about those kind of relationships and how they can improve. Sometimes all we need to do is meet the other person, the person that we potentially have a conflict with. Just sit down and talk with them, have a cup of coffee with them to get to know them. You begin to better understand someone else's perspective when you just have a simple conversation.
And we did that in Dayton. It was facilitated over a period of 12 weeks. And it was a facilitated conversation. And it was not all huggy, lovey-dovey. We were told by the facilitator, who actually came from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Unit, officers, you're going to have to sit there and keep your mouth shut, and we're going to let folks vent. And you're going to get your chance. But they've never had people in the community have never had the opportunity to sit down with decision makers. We were all commanders and up to the chief, and be able to sit down and tell us how they really thought and felt. And sometimes what was driving their perceptions was not accurate. And we had to sit there and take it. And it was brutal at times. The flip side, though, was when the facilitator, and again, this is over a period of 12 weeks, the facilitator is like, well, what would you like the community to know? And we could share our perceptions, like the homicide, 200 eyewitnesses. How do you expect us to solve a crime when your community members that you have influence over won't cooperate? And so we had those very frank discussions, and it did. Something very good came out of that. And part of what came out of that was the animosity towards the police department dropped dramatically. And then the first critical incident that we had after that process, then those folks that were engaged with us in that 12-week came forward and defended the police department to the community. Wait until everything is done, and we can find out exactly what happened. And we didn't have any riots. We didn't have any bad press. And we went through the process the way it should be done. So it's not all hugs and whatever, balloons and all that kind of stuff. It will be a brutal process, but when you come out the other end of it, it's worth what you had to go through to achieve that relationship and that trust. People go out, we don't trust the police. Well, and you know what cops say? We don't trust the community. We have a saying, everybody lies to the police. You did it, you know who did it, or you're just supposed to lie to the police. So even when you do tell us something, we're going, are they lying? Because we haven't built up the trust in the community, and the community hasn't built up the trust with us. The only way you're going to do that, sit down and intentionally address it. And it takes time, and it will take, there will be some tears shed. There will be some really angry words exchanged, but keep in mind, if you're willing to commit all resources and energy, you can intentionally get through those brutal moments, and it's worth it.
Wow. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our discussion today. Pat, thank you so much for being on the show. How can people get in touch with you? Where can they find you? You have a number of books that you've authored. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
PJ Welsh LLC at gmail.com is my Gmail, and then pjwelshllc.com. You have the website up there, and I've written a couple books. One is specifically law enforcement related. The other one is faith-based, the Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Badge is the one you're showing there. And the other one, Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Cross, is kind of my faith journey. And it's kind of interesting. It wasn't all lovey-dovey. I was abandoned in an orphanage when I was 3 days old in another country. And so I tell my journey started kind of rough and rocky. I'm on LinkedIn, Pat Welsh, JD, the initials JD. And then Facebook, I'm also PatWelsh.5. So reach out.
I'll be sure to link all that in the comments and in the show notes for the podcast. We'll put those links on there so people can link right to you. Thank you so much for being on the show. If you hang on for just a minute after I kind of wrap up things, and we'll talk offline after we're off air. Next week, I have a very interesting conversation with a active duty police officer. He's from New Jersey, Brad Woodby. He's a SWAT officer. He has an amazing story of resilience, of coming from the depths of despair to now leading or teaching. He's a New Jersey State Master Resiliency Trainer, and helping other officers deal with the stress of the job and learning how to grow and to become a better police officer. Next Friday, November 13th, Brad will be with us. Be sure to tune in for that. You have been watching First Responder Friday. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our guests for being here. And we will see you again next week on First Responder Friday.